Welcome back, everyone. This is the story of Orion, the giant one-eyed god. Since the constellation known as Orion, as we call it today anyway, this constellation and its coupled journey with the sun in that very special place in the sky that I've been calling the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye, we're finding out that this specific coupling is used as a template for many, many myths and religions and stories of faiths and different cultures and different civilizations all throughout different times and places. So I think it's important to take a look at the specific myth or story of Orion that we've all been given and to decode it with the help, of course, with this real oracle. Because that's what we're learning here over and over, how to decode what these myths or stories really mean. And we're finding out that you can't ever really decode them completely without this real oracle or the secret decoder ring that we're discovering more and more about through these videos. So what we're going to do is start out with the myth of Orion. If you look on Wikipedia, just to get you started, under the heading of legends, we're going to start with what you can find about Orion as far as Homer and Hesiod. And these are ancient Greek writers. Orion, it says, is mentioned in the oldest surviving works of Greek literature, which probably date back to the 7th or 8th century BC. Now that's a really long, long time ago. We're talking ancient, right? But it goes on. But which are the products of what began in the oral tradition several centuries earlier. So let's stop right there. So basically what this is saying is that they've traced the origin of this story to even older civilizations prior to writing. That's how old this story is. So in Homer's Iliad, Orion's described as a constellation, and the star Sirius is mentioned as his dog. And we know about Sirius from previous pieces, right? Sirius is that very bright star in the constellation of Canis Major, or the great dog. That's why Sirius is known as the dog star. So in the Odyssey, it goes on to say, Orion is essentially the godfather of hunting. Odysseus sees him hunting in the underworld with a bronze club, a great slayer of animals. And in some regards, Orion claims to be able to hunt any animal in existence. It's also mentioned as a constellation, as the lover of the goddess Dawn, and as someone slayed by Artemis. And I want to let you know here, this is one of the good things to use Greek and Roman mythology in this all-seeing eye or secret decoder ring to decode them, because it makes it a simpler layer. When you're looking at Greek and Roman mythology specifically, they tell you right in the story who is who in the characters that they're given. And they let you know right out that Artemis is the moon goddess. So Artemis represents the moon. And it goes on, Wikipedia says, and Orion is also regarded as the most handsome of the earthborn. So as we get to this last sentence, this is what is really interesting. In the works and days of Hesiod, Orion is also a constellation, one whose rising and setting with the sun is used to reckon the year. So it's a calendar, and it was known in ancient times, this coupling of the journey of the constellation that we call now Orion and the sun. But as you can see, even as openly and as plainly as things are symbolically represented in the myths and stories, no one ever gives you the secret decoder ring to fully decode them. But we're going to. So let's take a look at what the website of GreekMythology.com has to offer about a very simple telling of the Orion story. We're going to read it really quick, plug some things in here for just all of our knowing overall, And then what we're going to do afterwards is take the specific elements of the story, the characters and the journey that is talked about within the story, and we're going to plug it into our sky story, or the all-seeing eye, or the real oracle here, and make complete sense of it. So let's get started. From GreekMythology.com's website. It says, Orion was a hunter in Greek mythology, and there are various stories about his birth as well as the way he died. According to the oldest version, he was the son of the god Poseidon. Okay, so stop right there, because it doesn't tell you, and you need to know this, it's important, that the god Poseidon is the god of the sea. And that's going to be important to know for what comes next. If you didn't know that, it wouldn't totally make sense. All right, so he's the son of the god Poseidon, or the sea god, and Uriel, daughter of King Minos of Crete. So let's stop here again, because Crete, of course, is a actual place on Earth, right? We're talking about Greece, so it's in the Mediterranean region, and there is an actual place, Crete. And you're going to find this, a pattern repeated often in these myths and stories and ancient traditions, where actual places on Earth are talked about in these myths. Because the purpose of all of these myths, no matter where they are created, no matter where they're told, is to do the fundamental thing of connecting the heavens and the earth. In other words, telling stories about our origins coming down from the heavens and our return back upon our death. This is extremely important to understand, to know that some of the references of actual places on Earth are also places that they're referencing. It's an alchemical concept, right? As above, so below. Well, they're also referencing places in the celestial space, the sky above our heads. There's this coupling or mirror image theme. It's not a theme. It's a template. It's something that over and over again you're going to see as an almost like setting or backdrop to a lot of these myths, this coupling and mirror imagery. All right, so going back to what GreekMythology.com has to say about the myth of Orion, now we'll know, because the god Poseidon is the sea god, where it says here, thanks to his father, Orion had the ability to walk on water, which is how he reached the island of Chios. Now, wait a minute. Maybe needle on the record for a lot of people when I just read that statement. Orion had the ability to walk on water. I know everybody is thinking right now, where have I heard that before? And they know immediately. This is the story of Jesus, right? This is one of the miracles told within that story of Jesus. And many Christians are taught that all of the information that we're given in the story of Jesus are specific only to that character in that story, right? It's the foundation of most people's Christian beliefs. So they're taught that when Jesus walked on water, for instance, that was a miracle that was specific to the person in the story known as Jesus. But you can see here that this is a myth that goes back even prior to the time that we have writing. And Orion, being the son of the sea god Poseidon, was given the ability to walk on water long before the story of Jesus and his ability to walk on water was ever written down. This kind of stuff is what makes many, many people who are hearing this information for the first time extremely uncomfortable. But this is the truth, and this is the truth that has been occulted, not just in places like Christianity, not just that specific religion. This is all of them, everywhere. All right, so continuing on. There, after drinking too much, talking about Orion, right, he made sexual advances to Merope, the daughter of the local king, King Oenopion? Oenopion. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Probably not. Let's go on. The king had him blinded and removed from the island. Blind Orion reached the island of Lemnos, which was the place where the god Hephaestus had his forge. Helped by Hephaestus and his servant Sedalion, Orion reached the east, where the sun god Helios restored his eyesight. He then went to Crete and hunted with the huntress, goddess Artemis. Remember, that's the moon goddess, and her mother Leto. He was so enthusiastic that he declared he would kill every animal in the world. Gaia, the goddess of the earth, got angry and sent a giant scorpion, which successfully killed Orion. Upon hearing the news, Artemis and Leto asked from Zeus, who you want to know in the Greek and Roman pantheon of many gods, Zeus sits at the top, right? He's the god of the gods. He's the head god, Zeus. So Artemis and Leto asked Zeus to put their fellow hunter in the skies. Zeus agreed and turned Orion into a constellation, as well as the scorpion that killed him. Goes on to say, a different version of Orion's death has it that he fell in love with Artemis, again, the moon goddess, and the goddess was also very much fond of him. However, her twin brother Apollo, who you want to know also is another sun god, okay? But we already heard from the story with Helios. He's a sun god, right? We have Apollo. He's another one. Okay, so Apollo, the sun god, was quite against this love affair that his twin was sparking up with Orion, you see. And so he devised a plan. One day while Orion was swimming in a lake with his head barely visible, Apollo went to his sister and challenged her skills as an archer. To prove him wrong, he told her, shoot at Orion's head, whom Artemis barely recognized, as there was a considerable distance between them. Artemis hit her target, and unknowingly, she killed her lover. Now, before we go on, the other thing I want to point out before we start fully decoding this is this should explain why some of these myths are so intense or violent. They have a lot of very shocking storylines and journeys and imagery in them. And the reason that you want to connect things at this point for this is because many of these stories, just like the story of Orion, go way back to the time before writing. So in order to make things easier to remember, right, because your memory is all you're going to have to remember these stories, doesn't it make sense that something shocking is more easy to remember if you're telling the story, right? Keeping things simple if you don't have writing to help you. All right, so let's take now the details of the story of Orion and start plugging them into the sky story. So I recognized a familiar pattern, as you will too, very quickly once you start getting a hang of this here and we continue to decode more myths and stories together. So what we're going to do, once again, we got a screenshot from Stellarium, free online program you can find to verify everything I'm going to show you once again. And the pattern I saw familiar caused me to take a screenshot specifically from what we commonly call the summer solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere. So this year, that's around what we commonly call June 21st of 2020. So we're taking a look at what's going on in the sky at high noon on that day. And the reason it's high noon is because that's when the sun is at its highest point in the sky for the day, or when the sun's at its zenith. This is from the Northern Hemisphere viewer's perspective. But to orient you here once again to what you're looking at, because it's important, the very special place in the sky we stay focused on is when you face due south, and you're going to be looking. The reason it's due south is because that green line there, the north-south meridian line, that crosses this red arc of the ecliptic, right? This arc that's going across the screen there. And all the action, the real all-seeing eye or the oracle, is happening in this very special place or this area in the sky. Now, if you're looking at the shape that the arc of the ecliptic makes to the Earth, you can see for yourself why people who were making these discoveries would describe it as an eye, or maybe an island, or a boat, or a ferry. All of this imagery, these types of things are going to start to make sense. But the other important thing to know is that also this area underneath the arc of the ecliptic to where the Earth then meets the sky, right, the horizon, this is known as the celestial sea, part of the sky, right? And that's why many of the constellations that you see in this area of the sky are going to be things named after things you would find in the sea. They're water related, they're sea monsters. So this particular area of the sky is also known as the celestial sea. It's been described as an island. You can see, why that would make sense as well. So know all these things, as we're going into these stories, that this particular area of the sky has been talked about many, many times from, ancient times forward. And it's been described in various different ways because, right, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Okay, so what we're going to do now is know that this also is a hemisphere. You can think about it that way, that you're looking at also with this all-seeing eye or this oracle. This wheel in the sky, it keeps on turning. A song from Journey, and you're going to know all these people writing all these songs, all of this stuff. It's all about the same thing. They're all in this illuminated club, and they know all about it. Okay, so looking at the summer solstice from the perspective of someone in the northern hemisphere, this hemisphere that you're looking at, right, this arc of the ecliptic and underneath it to the Earth, you have to consider that this wheel is turning, right, on the other side of it in what we call the southern hemisphere. And instead of it being noon there, it's 12 hours difference, so it's midnight. This is another reason why there's so much twin symbolism and coupling and mirror imagery, especially the mirror imagery kind of thing. That's really important. And it's because what we're looking at, right, as far as the all-seeing eye is concerned from the northern hemisphere viewer's perspective, it's only half of the story. The other half, right, is going on in the dark, in the south, in the underworld, in other words, the mirror image or opposite of what we're looking at in the sky right now, okay? So it's a different way to turn your thinking and what you're looking at around. All right, so we're going to plug in our characters here now and start to go forward. And this will be quick because you're going to see it's pretty easy once you know what it is that you're looking at. All right, so thanks to his father, right, it says that Orion has the ability to walk on water. Now, we already said this is the area of the sky that's known as the celestial sea. Lots of constellations named after things in the water. So the journey of Orion could already be just in, how the rising and setting of this constellation being in this area could be referencing the celestial sea altogether. But as we've noted in other pieces as well, the constellation of Eridanus, that's right to the west, right at the bottom, right near Orion's foot. Eridanus is a large constellation there, and it's the river. So that could also be the reference to Orion once again, walking on the water. Now it says he reaches the island of Chios. So the reason that I mentioned that a lot of ancient people have also described this area that you're looking at as an island is for this reason as well. These special crossing points in this celestial sea area of the sky, many myths and legends also you're going to find are representing certain crossing points, like this special crossing of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic Orion is doing at this time of the year, are represented as islands. And in this case, Chios, being represented in this part of the story, is referencing that very special crossing point right here. So, it goes on. There, after drinking too much, he made advances to Merope, the daughter of the local king. So who's Merope? If you look up where Orion's, not where his bow is crossing the north-south meridian line, but his other arm, he's holding the sun, right? And also, there's that dark spot. That's the moon, and it's actually a new moon. This alignment, you're going to find over and over again, only occurs for this 24-hour period known as the summer solstice, where Orion is found to be at the cross of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic, and in his outstretched arm at the top of the arc of the ecliptic, he's holding both the sun and the new moon in his hand when the sun is at its zenith at high noon, I might add. So, all right, Merope in this telling is the new moon. Why? Because if you take a look at the sky story, Orion is essentially holding the new moon in his hand, right? So in order to make the story stick or have that mnemonic, you can see that a rather intense description of a sexual assault, right? Putting his hands on Merope, well, that would fit. Now it goes on and says that she's the daughter of the local king, and he's the one who had him blinded for this. Who's the king? Well, let's take a look at who's crowning or at the top of the arc of the ecliptic in this picture. It's the constellation of Taurus. So this is going to be the local king. That's his daughter, right? And he is going to be represented by the constellation of Taurus. And you're going to find out in many myths and legends and stories that the constellation of Taurus is specifically important in many of these stories and often represents characters that are leaders but specifically, you're going to find a lot of references to Taurus being a mother or a wife. It's usually one of the other. It's usually represented by a feminine character, but in this case, it fits, right? That the constellation of Taurus crowning the arc of the ecliptic at this time is this king that blinded Orion. And he removed him from the island. And then it says, blind Orion reached the island of Lemnos, which was the place where god Hephaestus had his forge. Now, I want to stop there and point you to a constellation, a very small, looks just like a line, near the constellation of Eridanus, or the river. And it's called Fornax, which means the furnace. So when you look up the god Hephaestus, you find out that he's the god of blacksmiths, basically. And in order to do any smithing work, you need a super high heat, and a furnace is appropriate as it's plugging into this story, as we can see what's going to happen in the sky story here. So it goes on, helped by Hephaestus, which we're plugging in as the constellation of Fornax, and his servant Sedalion, Orion reached the east, where the sun god Helios restored his eyesight. So we're going to stop right there. His servant Sedalion, when you look up, and you do have to get a little bit deeper into this, but I'll just tell you briefly. Sedalion is sometimes referenced as like a smaller entity than is Orion. So Orion is a giant in many tellings of this tale, and Sedalion would be just, right, a regular, like you and I, sized person, and rides on the shoulder of Orion during this journey. So if you look to where the constellation of Gemini is just at the shoulder of Orion. We're going to watch that as well as we go forward and watch all of these elements in the sky story and see how they play out. And you'll realize pretty easily that the secret decoder ring, or this all-seeing eye, makes things a whole lot easier to see. All right, so here's Orion now in what we commonly call the beginning of August 2020, high noon. Sun is at its zenith. Orion now further off the cross, right, that area of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic. But take a look, right, at his foot where Eridanus, the constellation of the river, is going down. You can see that the constellation Fornax, that little line that we were looking at, the furnace, that already is descended now into the western horizon at this time of year. And so you can see that, right, the god Hephaestus, the smith god, the blacksmith god, Fornax, it goes prior to Orion. So he follows, in other words. And so let's keep taking a look at the journey. And you can see that when we get to what we commonly call Halloween, or October 31st of 2020 at high noon, the constellation of Orion at high noon is now completely descended into the western horizon of the Earth and is not any longer visible above the Earth's horizon this time of year. But over in the east, I want you to take a look at the constellation of Scorpio. That is when the constellation of Scorpio is becoming visible again in this part of the world in this time of the year. So following the story forward, right, we're getting to the part where after Orion has journeyed with the help of Hephaestus, the smith god's assistant, Sedalion, he gets to the other island. So what we're going to look at now is the sky story in what we commonly call March 1st of 2020 at high noon. And it's the time of the year in what we commonly call the Northern Hemisphere where the constellation of Orion makes his return again, right? Because you can see when we're queuing up a screenshot of stellarium at high noon when the sun is at its zenith this time of year, it's just when you can start to see the first couple of stars of the bow of the constellation of Orion start to breach the eastern horizon of the Earth once again. So Orion's eyesight is restored, right, by the sun god Helios when he reaches this point in the story. So you can see how it fits in the sky story when we go forward another month to what we commonly call April 1st of 2020 at high noon. The constellation of Orion, more fully risen, right, his head now ascending, right, from the eastern horizon of the Earth, and he's looking, right at the sun, restoring his eyesight as he rises again this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere. So let's go on to the next part of the story. He then goes to Crete, and he hunts with the huntress goddess Artemis and her mother Leto. Let's plug these in because Greek and Roman mythology helps make things a little bit easier for us because they tell you right on the surface. They don't make you do a lot of digging or figuring out. They tell you flat out that Artemis is the moon goddess. So in this case, we're going right back to that familiar pattern that we started with, the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, that special alignment where that 24-hour period you'll find at high noon, and it only happens this time of year, where Orion, his bow is at the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic cross, and in his outstretched hand is both the sun and the new moon. So Artemis, in this part of the story, is that new moon. Now we're also going to plug her mother in which would be Leto, as the constellation of Taurus once again, because as I mentioned before, Taurus oftentimes represents mother or wife figures. And when we are taking a look at the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice, it is the constellation of Taurus crowning this area of the arc of the ecliptic right at the cross of the north-south meridian line there, right? That very special place. Okay, so Leto is Taurus, Artemis is the new moon. So Orion was so enthusiastic, he declared he would kill every animal in the world. Gaia, the goddess of the earth, and they tell you that just outright, right, got angry and sent a giant scorpion, which successfully killed Orion. Upon hearing the news, Artemis and Leto asked Zeus to put their fellow hunter in the sky, and Zeus agreed and turned Orion into a constellation, as well as the scorpion that killed him. So when we're taking a look at this part of the story, we've plugged in our characters with the exception of the scorpion. So once again, going back to what we commonly call October 31st of 2020 at high noon, remember that that is when the constellation of Orion is no longer going to be visible above the Earth's horizon at all in this area of the world, but in the east, the constellation of Scorpio has begun to rise. Now we're going to end with how GreekMythology.com gives us this second or different version of Orion's death. And we're also going to look at another perspective. Again, the reason I'm doing this is to help train our vision, right? The way we think about things and these stories, these legends and myths, and even these religious texts and scripts. These are mirror imaging, coupling, themes that we see over and over again, twinning, all of this kind of thing. And it's once again because this all-seeing eye sees all over the earth all at the same time. Here in the northern hemisphere, if it's day, in the southern hemisphere, it's night, right? So we're going to cue up the Stellarium screenshot to the northern hemisphere's perspective, looking at what we commonly call New Year's Eve at midnight. And the reason I'm doing this as well, looking at a different time of the year altogether, is once again to show you that this mirror imaging or this coupling, this different world type imagery that we're given throughout these stories, it's because these myths were designed masterfully, meaning they have to fit all over the world, right, for everybody's eyes, because this all-seeing eye sees all of us day and night, always. Okay, so a different version of Orion's death has it that he fell in love with Artemis. So once again, we're talking about the moon goddess. And as you can see in this picture, the full moon is right at the top of the arc of the ecliptic in the constellation of Gemini's hands, right? One of the twins. Right at that special crossing point of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic. So plugging in Artemis once again to the moon. Says Artemis, this goddess, was also very fond of Orion. Where's Orion here? He's to the west, just come off, right? Because he's there on Christmas, as we saw in our last video series. But he's moved off of it by New Year's Eve, this north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic, as he's going to continue his downward descent right into the west as he sets. All right, so this is where Orion's located. So we've got the moon on the east side of the north-south meridian line and Orion to the west of it. Now it says in the story, however, her twin brother Apollo, which by the way is a sun god. So we already heard that Helios, a sun god, healed Orion's blindness, but now we have Apollo, another sun god, and he is Artemis, the moon goddess's twin brother. He was quite against this love affair, and he devised a plan. So one day while Orion was swimming in a lake with his head barely visible, Apollo, the sun god, went to his sister, the moon goddess, and challenged her skills as an archer. To prove him wrong, he told her to shoot at Orion's head. whom Artemis barely recognized because there was a considerable distance between them. Artemis hit her target and unknowingly killed her lover. Now, that's a terrible story, right? But it makes sense now that we know that some of these details are given to be specifically easy to remember mnemonic devices so that you could remember easily both the story when you're telling it and when in oral tradition societies, right, around the campfire without books or writing, you would maybe dance or sing or act out while you were pointing to what was occurring in the sky as well. Because those were your tools. That's what you had to communicate and to remember prior to writing. Now, what I want to show you is the same picture of what we commonly call New Year's Eve in the Northern Hemisphere at midnight. And I altered the view, our viewing perspective a little bit when I took this screenshot in Stellarium, because I want to show you a better visual of this coupling so you can see exactly why it's so important. So as you can see at the top of the image, you can see the constellation of Orion. But he has just come off, right, the north-south meridian line and that special cross of the ecliptic. Follow that green line, the north-south meridian line, all the way down. And right at the cross of that same north-south meridian line in the ecliptic, in the other part of the world, right, in the southern hemisphere, it's the sun that's sitting right at that cross at high noon as it is there, right? Because here in the northern hemisphere, it's midnight. This shows you visually why this coupling of Orion and the sun is so important and gives you a better perspective to take a look at this all-seeing eye or this oracle, this very special place in the sky that turns all over the world, over all of our heads, no matter where you are on Earth, and has done so cyclically for centuries, perhaps eternally. So as we end things out here, if you've ever wondered about what maybe these quote-unquote conspiracy theorists were going on about for these last several years, showing you pictures with wall-to-wall imagery that were given of celebrities in their album covers, magazine covers, photos, and things like this. And everybody in those photos is doing this covering up of one eye thing. And everybody's speculating about what that symbolism is all about, what they're trying to sign to the audience, what that means really. Well, it's this. Now you know. The knowledge of the truth of all the world's greatest myths, stories, legends, the foundational stories for every major religion on the earth today, and what they really mean, and how to really decode them. This is the secret they're keeping and have kept for possibly centuries from all of us. But that one eye reference, it's a layered sign. So let's decode it. Obviously, now that we know what we're looking at here, it specifically references the constellation of Orion, who was once blinded but had his vision then restored. But we want to keep in mind that these people, to get this knowledge, they obviously had to be initiated into some very wicked cult that they're all a part of. And they were sworn to secrecy about this knowledge that they were given, and they have to keep it occulted or hidden. And, worse than that, use what they know to deceive all the rest of us in the process. And this, in my humble knowing, is not what the Creator wanted. At least He didn't want this knowledge to be wielded this way. Or she didn't. It was supposed to aid in our wisdom, in our connection to the Creator's real heavens. It was designed to be a way to keep a calendar, a clock, and a way to help, whether it be on land or by sea, in travel and navigation. It was a compass, a guide, and evidence of a masterful intelligence that designed it, and also the mind in all of us to observe it and decode it, use it to our highest benefit, wisdom, and deep knowledge. At this time, it's supposed to aid in our healing and our vision correction. And that's exactly why we're doing this work. We'll end things here, and until next time when we decode yet another story, legend, or even a religious text or scripture. Be well.